Thanks.
Okay. Welcome everybody. Jenna, would you like to open up, or do you want me to do the opening?
Well, I would like to say hi to everyone and welcome and thank you very much. And then I can pass it over to you to introduce COPE Canada and the Canadian Association for Global Health. Just
Yes.
a big thanks to Mumbi and Lily before we get started for being with us, and to Lauren for having helped with setting everything up. And I'll leave it to you, Joanne.
Okay, well, thank you, Jenna, and my thanks as well to all of you. And so welcome everybody. This event, we will, start over again. So we will be listening to Mumbi and Lily on Innovation Transformed by Participatory Action Research. This event is brought to you by COPE Canada, the Canadian Community of Practice and Ecosystem Approaches to Health, and also by the Working Group on Climate Change and Health of the Canadian Association for Global Health. And so COPE Canada organized an intensive course on ecosystem approaches to health every year. And this event is part of the course, but it's also been, it's the second or the third year now that we're collaborating with the working group. And a few words on maybe COPE Canada is a community of practice that exists since 2008. That's pan-Canadian, and we do stuff like teaching, like mobilizing, like trying to support, develop all kinds of approaches relate to the links between health, society, and the environment. That's basically what we do. The working group on climate change and health was launched in early 2018 in recognition of the urgency of addressing challenges at the intersection of health and climate change. The mandate of the working group is to identify knowledge gaps through the member of the Canadian Association for Global Health, and to communicate the current state of knowledge and to raise awareness of drivers for changes in climate health research. Among the activities that we're leading are webinars on various topics related to climate change and health. So if without you waiting, I would like to introduce, and now I'm going to read, so I'm not saying anything that I shouldn't be saying about you too. So first, Mumbi Maina, who's our guest for the second year, and we're really, really happy that she's accepted and bring a friend with her. And oh, thank you, Mumbi. And so Mumbi is a postdoctoral fellow in the Departments of Educational Studies at the University of British Columbia and a social planner in the Social Policy and Projects Division of the City of Vancouver. Mumbi's work has focused on grassroots social and environmental justice organizing, anti-racist education, and cross-cultural collaboration with immigrants and other communities across North America. Our recently completed doctoral program focuses on the uptake of sustainability in Canadian higher education, examining how various actors, including historically marginalized groups, are involved in the enactment of sustainability in policy and practice. Our published work covers topics such as sustainability in higher education, intersectionality in environmental education, and newcomers' role in in reconciliation. So I guess you should be teaching the course in Cope Canada, because you do you do all those things that we're looking at, and that's not all. She was the first Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Fellow in the Sustainability Group at the City of Vancouver. And in her current position as a social planner, she works to imagine how municipal governments can effectively tackle the challenges of rising social and environmental inequities that are emblematic of many metropolitan cities across the globe. This work uses decolonizing racial equity and intersectional approaches to transform city policies, practices, and processes. That's a challenge. And we also are happy to have with us Lily Raphael. She has a background in community planning, design, education, and storytelling, and under recruit for our course. And for 10 years, she has worked at the intersection of culture, ecology, and community development, with an emphasis on co-creating with communities to address eco-social challenges. She currently works as a planet and innovation lead for the Circular Food Innovation Lab at the City of Vancouver. She's also a designer and a facilitator for an action research project called Transforming Cities from Within at UBC. In both roles, she supports transformative innovation in the public sector, drawing on participatory, equity-centered, and systems thinking approaches to design spaces of collaborative learning and experimentation. She is of mixed ancestry. She's Black, Louisiana Creole on her father's side, and German and Irish on her mother's side. That's great mixed, indeed. So the floor is to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jenna. And I'm like being invited to meet people. I'm like, should I be admitting people to the meeting? That's not my role. But thanks, thanks, Lauren, for making me. Thanks for making me co-host. But Jenna, thank you so much for inviting us back to speak to and just share some thoughts and to learn with you all together today. And thanks, Joanne, for that introduction. It's just such a privilege to join you all this morning from the unceded and traditional territories of the Hunkaminam and the Skohomish speaking peoples in Burnaby, where I live. And I'm joined today by my colleague Lily, and so I will let maybe Lily say hello first before I proceed with the presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. And yeah, thank you, Mumbi, for bringing me along too to this wonderful group of people. I'm calling in from the Seychelles territory in Seychelles Nation, which is over on the Sunshine Coast in BC. Normally, I would be calling in from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. But very, very, very honored to be here and excited to be in conversation with you all.
Thanks, Lily. And I'm just going to say bonjour tout le monde. That's the much French I know. I learned French a little bit when I was back in Kenya. I'm originally from Kenya. But I know how to say bonjour. Je m'appelle Mombi Maina. Je viens de Kenya. Je suis très heureuse to be here with you all today. And I'll just leave it there. But we have shared a link of the slides that we're going to be using today in the chat. So if you would like to go ahead and click that link, these are live Google slides that thanks Lily for dropping them again in the chat. But perhaps for the sake of those who might not be able to access them, I will go ahead and share my slides just for a little bit, and then I'll close them and then just have a little embodiment practice. Let's see, view slideshow. Okay. And now I I did a slideshow. I'm not sure I can see my Zoom now. All right, so just let me do this. Okay, share slide. Actually, just give me a moment. Bear with me here for a sec. What I'm doing right now is I'm removing my slide from the many tabs that are open because I don't want people to see how many tabs I have open. So that's what I was doing right there. Just full disclaimer. Here we go. Yay, so it's nice and clean. It's just one. It's not going to stress anybody out. Okay. Can you see that slide okay? Awesome. I see a few nods. All right. So yes, Lily and I are here today to talk about innovation transformed by action research. And here's a plan for today. So we've had welcoming and remarks, and thank you so much. And then we'll have a small, short embodiment arriving practice or exercise. And then we'll talk a little bit about the work that we have been doing collectively, Lily and I, and a host of other colleagues who sadly could not have been here. They really wanted to be here, and they send their love to you all. So, but they're here in spirit, and we welcome them. And then we'll talk about the 3 questions that we're holding, and then we'll leave space for some answers and questions. So Lily, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mumbi. So for those who are following along in the slide deck itself, on slide 3 and 4, we just wanted to give people a chance to just say, how are you arriving today? So you can type into one of the boxes that's on the screen and just give us an update of what's going on in your world today and how are you arriving in this moment. And I can read out a few of them. It won't show up on the screen because I don't know why Google hasn't figured that out yet, but it doesn't show when people are typing, so I can read a few out as I see them. We have nourished, but also a bit overwhelmed, anxious and tired, feeling excited about this presentation, invigorated by growing signs of spring, soothing the spirit, anxious, too busy, a little chilly, but excited for this event, open to learning, relaxed and curious, and some in the chat as well, happy and hopeful, oh nice, yeah, invigorated by, oh, I read that one already, fuzzy but eager to learn, inspirée et curieuse. Also forgive my French, it's not great. It's been a long time since I've practiced it, so bear with me. Well rested and excited to learn. Grateful to have electricity and a roof after Ottawa storm. Happy. And excited that this webinar we've been planning for a few months is happening. Inspired and grateful. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I've got I like this photo of the chair with the computer on it. It looks like a real vibe. I love it. Oh, we got a couple more. Let's see. Looking to learn. Intrigued. Okay, thank you so much. So really grateful to hear how you all are arriving, and I'd like to invite us to just do a quick embodiment exercise so that we can just arrive into this next 45 minutes together. And yeah, feel free to keep typing into the boxes as we go along. But you are welcome to just do whatever makes you comfortable for this next little embodiment moment. I would invite people to, if you're seated, just sit up nice and tall in your chair. And also if you're standing, you can just stand and plant 2 feet on the floor. If you're lying down, just feel yourself supported by whatever it is you're lying on. And just take a moment to either close your eyes or softly focus them in front of you. And have your arms either on your lap or down by your side. And just take a moment and feel the ground supporting you. Just check in with yourself. Notice where you might be holding any weight or tension. Is there anywhere that feels particularly easeful? Just notice. And what we'll do now is just take 3 breaths together to collectively enter into this time together. So we'll place our hands on our belly and we'll inhale for 5 and exhale for 5. So we'll do that 3 times and I'll guide you through it. So we'll start by inhaling 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhaling 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhaling 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhaling 2, 3, 4, 5. One last inhale together. Inhale 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhale 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's take actually one more inhale through the nose. And as you exhale, just let out a nice big sigh. You can take a moment to just stretch in any way you might need to. Just listen to whatever you need in this moment. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes again and we'll go back into our Zoom community space that we have today. Thanks, everyone. And I will hand it over to, well, actually just a little bit to say about that is that's how we started all of our sessions in our community of practice that we did, that we took people through. So that was just a way for everyone to just kind of get grounded into this space, and hope that you also enjoyed having a little moment of that as well. Now I'll pass it over to Membi.
Thank you so much, Lily. I will share my screen again, and thank you all for participating and arriving into this space with us. So I will see here, slideshow. All right, so for those who are not able to see the screen, that's all how people are arriving. And this is our the amazing team that has been part of this learning journey and social innovation space for the last year. This was in 2021. We've got Lindsay Cole, and who is the one who brought us all together. This was part of her PhD research, and so I just want to give a shout out and gratitude to Lindsay for bringing us together. And we've got Maggie Lowe, who is a faculty member at UBC and is the lead Indigenous and decolonizing practitioner on this work. We've got Kyla, who is also she is a student at the Regional School of Regional Planning at UBC, and has been the research assistant and also a co-designer and a co-facilitator for this team. We've got Lily as well, who you've been introduced to. We've got Rob V at the bottom there, who is a faculty member at UBC and the lead researcher, sort of, I can call him that, on the team. And we've got Maura Quayle, who is also a faculty member and vice provost at UBC as well, and has been our advisor and also part of the team and a lead designer for us as well. So this is the team, and me, of course, at the top, at the left there. So this is who has been part of this process, and we've been doing different things together, but really a cohesive space, a place of researching, love, and really working together. And so what did we set out to do? So this process began in March. The cohort itself, the learning journey that we embarked on, began in March 2021 until November. That's when the learning journey ended. And it really was a process that was imagining what cities can be as sites for transformative change. So we worked with 12 city-based teams across different Canadian provinces, and the teams were made up of 3 to 4 people. I think there was one of 5 people that were working on different challenges, different intersections of challenges that are at the intersection of climate change, equity, and colonization. And this was a continuation of a different community of practice and part of the solutions lab that Lily and Lindsay and Maggie and other people had conducted. So this was sort of like the third iteration of this community of practice, but which initially was just for the city of Vancouver and community members. But this time around, it was open to all cities and other people across beyond Vancouver. And there were complex challenges that were of different natures. I think this is where we're talking about action research, transformative action research. The complexities, the challenges that they brought were real life challenges that they were working on at their cities. We had teams that were part of the community, a neighborhood house that was working in collaboration with the city. So we invited this cohort, these teams to come along with on this journey with us, working on real life challenges that they were dealing with at different cities at the intersection of those 3 issues. And the learning journey began at the far left here, where we sent out the invitation and invited people to apply. And we went through a week after we had selected everybody who applied was accepted into the program. And we began with an intensive program of I think, foundations, learning the basics, the foundations of innovation, of public sector innovation, of equity, to colonization, and imagining futures. And over a period of 2 weeks, where we were learning, I think 3 days per week together, really bringing in speakers to help us share some of those groundings. And we began with groundings on really what it means to be planning on Indigenous lands, and what it means to decolonize, and what it means to work in reciprocity when we're doing public sector innovation, and when we're coming together as a community of practice and as a cohort. And then we went through different weeks. We met on a monthly basis after that, where we had research, action, and observation, teachings and groundings on that. We had a session on self as system and systems mapping, reframing the different questions that they brought along. And then we had an immersive session at the bottom there of ideation, prioritizing, and prototyping, and inviting their circle of support to hear what they were thinking, to help them brainstorm, and to help them with some ideation on the solutions that they were coming up with. And then also prototyping, testing, to test out some of those solutions that they had brainstormed, all the way to a session of evaluation, storytelling, and imagining futures, or futurizing, of what those solutions could look like and how they could take those back into their cities. So this was a journey, and it's still continuing right now in terms of, we have, now that the cohort has completed the work, we have been doing some interviews with the teams, and now we're in the process of analysis and understanding what themes are coming up, so we can share and disseminate this information not only with academic community, but also with the cities, with the practitioners, so that way we can really bring to life that aspect of action research post the learning journey. And why climate equity decolonization in cities? We know that the times that we're living right now call for different ways of doing things. So an emphasis on transformative and imaginative futures is where we wanted to work, the space we wanted to work within, because the governance models, the ways that we're doing work is not working, and the way we are solving our problems is not working right now. So we need to imagine what transformation looks like and imagining possible futures. And the decolonization was a key part of this process, like I said, where we began by grounding this work on the land, on really understanding the indigenous histories of this land, and how city planning processes are rooted in colonial frameworks that have contributed to displacement, to erasure, and to discrimination against indigenous communities, against other racialized communities, and other equity denied or equity deserving communities. And we're also noticing that, that work was messy. So it's not a linear process. It's a messy work of really challenging the norms, the identities, the values that we have all brought into city planning processes. And it's an iterative process that of innovation, where we test and we experiment, and then we scale depending on what we're seeing through those prototyping processes. I'll hand it back to Lily to help us walk through this, our approach to innovation.
Thank you, Mumbi. So because there's a lot of different ways of thinking about innovation, and it's a term that is very broad and kind of nebulous, and there's a lot of different ways that people use it. We wanted to just be very clear about the ways in which we are talking about innovation, and this way of thinking about it is coming from our colleague Lindsay's. It's building off of our colleague Lindsay's research and work through the Solutions Lab at the City of Vancouver, as well as her action research with other public sector innovation labs, both here in Canada and in Europe. And so we can think about sort of this distinction between change and then transformation, emergence, and resurgence. So change is what happens kind of like through incremental adaptations, without really shifting anything within the current system. So the workings and the foundations of the current system remain unquestioned and unchanged, and it's more about making small improvements so that things work better. Whereas transformation is a more significant shift in people, structures, processes, and systems. And it's often triggered by a growing problem or challenge or crisis. So things are really building and often worsening. And there's pressure to shift or dislodge something that might be stuck and like launch it off into a different state. So, and then emergence is just an orientation to sort of like the things that unfold by different groups or different ways of being in interaction and in conversation with one another. I like to kind of summarize it as sort of the magic that happens when you allow for things to just evolve and arise and emerge as they're happening. And then resurgence refers to a specific form of emergence that is sparked by work to recover and revitalize different ways of being and relationships that have been suppressed and marginalized by the dominant system. So a lot of resurgence is often associated with revitalization of indigenous cultures and ways of being, and ways of being in relationship to one another and to the land. So the work that we're doing is firmly in the space of transformation, emergence, and resurgence. So this is the kind of innovation that we're going for. And if we go to the next slide, yes, magic. So this is kind of the work of the, on the left are the stuck patterns that, these are patterns that have been named kind of through just deeply understanding the types of systems that we work in the public sector. And, you know, the intervention or the transformative innovation is in the middle, and moving toward is on the right-hand side, a more kind of the outcome of the types of the conditions of the system or the paradigms that we would like to embody. So as you can see, you know, some are like moving away from white dominant, and doing that by reimagining possibilities and paradigms through lenses of equity and decolonization, so that we can move towards more inclusive and just societies and ways of being. Theater is also another thing that is a common thing that we can identify in public sector innovation. So it's the performativity or the optics of things, and making sure that things look a certain way without necessarily, you know, like becoming more deeply connected to something, so that things might shift. So what we're going for is a more authentic way of being in the public sector or in our transformative innovation spaces. If you go to the next slide, so these are just a few more patterns. Fear, you know, this fear of risk, or this aversion to risk that is often associated with work in the public sector. There's a lot of things that seem to be on the line a lot of times. So the innovation or the intervention there is to root in creativity and risk-taking, to develop and try new possibilities, ideas, and solutions. And that's moving towards a space of courage. Another big one is, of course, is scarcity and efficiency. Things need to be, there's pressures to have things be done in a timely and very, you know, like resource efficient way in the public sector. We're moving towards generating paradigms of abundance, so that we don't feel limited by this idea of scarcity. And yeah, these are a few other ones for a few other, you know, stuck patterns and stuck paradigms that we notice. So things like conflict avoidance. So engaging with tensions, conflict, and contestation would be the interventions in order for us to engage in conflict and use this as like a space of generating new possibilities of relating to one another. So these are sort of the paradigms that the stuck patterns that we've gathered up, and our practices are informing how we might shift towards the right-hand column of these new patterns and paradigms. And some of you might already be familiar with this structure of what a community of practice is, being a community of practice yourselves as well. And so this is just to just say a little bit about the tool that we used, or the container that we used for the learning, which was a community of practice. And we were especially focused on sharing and, oh, sorry, I think there's a little bit of feedback from someone else's audio, but we were particularly focused on sharing and supporting practice and building practice. So those were our two focuses for the learning journey itself. And I'll pass it back over to Mumbi to tell us about action research.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lily. I hope you can see some of the groundings and some of the thinkings and the theorizing that had helped us and is continuing to help us do this work and support others in learning how to move towards transformative emergent practices and ways of addressing the challenges, the complex challenges that are facing our society today. So all this was done within a transformative participatory action research. And really, this is, I've been in other research projects, but I think this particular one seeks to decenter power. So I'll just read this quote. Let us determine anew the boundary lines about whose knowledge matters, whose methodology counts, and how these questions are at the root of our survival and potential thriving as a learning species. Let us have courage enough to engage with the power dynamics that hold us on this unsustainable path, and let us practice mutually transforming power in serving for in service of a more beautiful world for all. And this is by Bradbury and colleagues who have written about participatory action research. And I think this is what we sought to do, to really embody a different way of doing research, where we're not the experts, but we're also learners, because all of us are practicing and working in these spaces. So sharing some of the things that we have found to be helpful, building on the research that our colleague Lindsay began to do, and learning how to do things differently, learning how to value other people's knowledges and to create a container that can help people be with each other in a different way, where we can model what it means to do slow work, to slow down, and to decenter power, what it means to bring about our identities to the forefront, where we are challenging our own paradigms, where we're challenging and disrupting power dynamics within the research process, and helping to not only bring about and share the theory, the outcomes with the academic research community, but also allows practitioners to be able to apply this knowledge as they learn, and learning that and sharing that with other people. So it's been an amazing journey that we have been on together, and we'll share just some reflections on what that has been like. So we have been holding these 3 questions as we have been doing this work, so Lily and I will be in conversation with each other as we go through these 3 questions, and then we're inviting you. We've put the link to the slides in the chat. So if you would like to ask some questions as we are in conversations on these 3 questions, please feel free to type in the questions in these call boxes, and then Lily and I will answer them as we go along. So the first one is, how have we practiced transformative participatory action research and co-created a space of engagement, openness, reflection, and colonization? So at the onset, we were very sure that we were all committed to researching differently, and we were committed to not just doing research for the sake of research, but research with impact. And we were determined to hold a space that helped to nurture some of those concepts that Lily was talking about, moving away from and towards. And so our invitation process for selecting the cohort members, we made it in a way that it didn't put a lot of labor on the potential participants, but we invited them to, we set out a few questions and invite them to have a meeting together and just record, because now everything, most things are happening via Zoom. So we wanted to simplify that process for them as much as possible. So we invited them to record themselves just speaking to some of those questions and send that to us. And we use that as the process of evaluating and understanding who was asking to come into the space, and how did they already think about these things themselves. And then I think creating a space for reflection, we had these invitations to practice, or AKA homework, that we developed for the cohort throughout the learning journey. And these were things that would help them gain more knowledge and more understanding and more background of the concepts that we were going through and some of the practices that we invited them to do. And also, we did not determine what the outcomes would be for them. So through the individual learning plan or design brief, we asked them to just think about what outcomes they wanted to have from this process. That way it wasn't just our outcomes, but they could also put down some intentions around what they wanted to learn, what they wanted to cultivate externally and internally to be able to do this work differently. So at the end of it, they didn't have to turn in anything, but they had to hold themselves accountable to what they wanted to get out of this process. And then we also invited them to not come in individuals, but to come as teams, because we found that when teams come together on a shared complex challenge, they're able to support one another in a good way. And then outside of that, we also invited them to identify a few people who would be their circle of support. That way it wasn't just a team, but also an outside, whether it's a community member or a colleagues in their department, to help them, to support them, to hold them accountable. And that way it's a relational process throughout. So maybe I'll stop it there and see if Lily, you have anything to add to this question before I move it to the next.
I think, yeah, everything you said is really great, Mumbi. I guess one thing that's coming to mind is in terms of the like decolonizing approach to it was just really like how much love and like how much of ourselves I think we brought to the process. And yeah, I think just like knowing that we wanted to make sure that the process was nurturing for each of us, like as individuals, as well as for the facilitation team and the team of the group of participants. So ensuring that I think we were pretty committed to putting forth like everyone's well-being kind of as a first and foremost, especially during the time of the pandemic when there's just so many things to be attentive to. So yeah, that's just another thing I would add.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and I think Lily's speaking to that too. I think we each have such unique skills that we each brought that really complemented the process so well that one of us facilitated, the other one helped to do the slides and whatever was needed. So we really complemented each other really well, and it didn't matter whether who you were. It's just we really tried to embody and to really share power together in a good way. And I think and invited the cohort to also think about how they could do that. So the next question, just realizing time is going fast. The next question is really, what are we learning about working at the intersection of climate, equity, and colonization that might inform public sector innovation or innovators? So I'll just share one thought and maybe Lily can share another and we can go to the next question. But I think what we are learning is that the way our cities are currently designed, or even internally, the way departments are put together, it really emulates the education system that puts different courses, separately, different subjects separately. And so we're seeing these siloed approaches to working on these complex challenges. And what we're realizing is that we cannot continue to work in silos, that engineering has to talk to social policy, the planning department has to talk to the buildings and development. So we have to be in conversation because the issues that we're dealing with are so complex. So environmental and sustainability folks cannot be on their own little spot. We have to find a way of coming together to think about how do we get here and what's the root causes of problems that we're seeing, and how can we together come up with solutions that are interconnected and do not keep people in silos. So the coming of the teams from different teams really helped to not only build relationships, but also to see the problems and the challenges as interconnected. So that's just one offering I'll offer, and then just give it to you, Lily, if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, I think that just one thing that I reflect on a lot is just how I guess like how persistent like we need to be just in order to work towards transformation. So, it's not something that is just sort of like we reach it and we're here and now we're transformed. It's something that we have to continue to practice every day, like within ourselves, as well as within the units that we work in our workplace, and just with those who we're in relationship with, and just, yeah, like how can we, continue to support one another, especially knowing that we have to continue in this way for, it'll just be a continuous work and ongoing. And so just making sure that we're supporting one another to do so. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then I'll just move to the final question and let you lead this one, Lily.
Thanks. So this is just a question of how are we working across competencies, capacities, and capabilities to build practices for transformative innovation. So this here is our kind of set of practices that we were really trying to build and share within the community of practice that we were working on. And they definitely are very interconnected, but are also, we just kind of made sense of them along these sort of three groupings of starting at the top, like visionary practices. So these larger practices of imagining and enacting visionary futures, generating this idea of abundance, embodying agency and accountability. And then the middle layer represents specific public sector innovation practices. So these are different competencies and capacities that we really want to build for public sector innovators that might not be used to working particularly in this way. So with a strong commitment to inclusion, equity, and justice, shifting to thinking and acting systemically. So thinking about how things interconnect in the whole system that they're a part of and in relationship to one another. Crafting through experimentation and iteration. So that's really bringing in sort of these innovation and design, systemic design approaches of trying something out before deciding, a way forward, or creating a strategy, or creating a policy. How can we experiment and explore in smaller, kind of quicker ways, what directions we should be going in, and getting feedback from those who are most impacted by it, by the decision that is to be made. And then, of course, nourishing co-creation, collaboration, and reciprocity. And then there's also the inward oriented personal practices of cultivating courage and vulnerability, embracing and unlearning orientation, and of course, staying with the ambiguity and discomfort that would come from becoming unstuck and kind of going through this transformative process. Of course, there's going to be discomfort that comes up with that. So we wove in these practices throughout our learning journey, and like some of them had very specific sessions that would relate to them. For example, the imagining and enacting visionary futures. That was a part of our immersive sessions in the beginning, where we invited people to do visionary fiction writing, so speculative fiction writing, to imagine a future where related to a world where their complex challenges, or the challenges that we're all wrestling with, are no longer there, and thinking about who is being centered in those stories. So it helped to encourage people to reframe the questions that they were coming in with. And yeah, I think, I guess one other thing I'll say about the practices is just in the spirit of co-creation and like evolving, is that these are also practices that we as a facilitation team were continuing to build ourselves. So like leaning into when there were times where we did feel uncomfortable, or needed to actually cultivate courage ourselves. So we were thinking about in what ways we can model these practices alongside the learning journey. I don't know, Mumbi, if you have any other things you'd like to add.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. I think I'm thinking about, as you're talking about, that the practices, I'm thinking about, and I know today's theme for the cohort is really thinking about power and reciprocity. And one of the things, the ways that we try to really identify and to explicitly identify power is realizing how when you're talking about justice and equity, how our different identities impact how we show up in this work. So we held a space, a caucusing space, where affinity groups sat together and really talked about what are the power dynamics that we're experiencing through this work, and how did this show up in the cohort, but also how did this in the learning journey, but also how did these power dynamics, because of how we are socially positioned, show up in our workplaces, and how does that inform the ability for us to do this work, and what do we need to do to support one another based on how we're positioned. So I think we're finding out some really amazing things about how it has been since the learning journey ended, and how the cohort members are integrating back into their cities, having been in this space of where we are creating space for co-creation, for imagining possible futures, for reflection, and then moving back into the systems that are constantly needing to keep going. What has that balance been? And I think we're seeing how people are using like the embodiment practices, the affinity groups, to sort of bring those practices back to their wider organization and to start to ask different questions. So I will stop it there for now and stop sharing my screen, and then we'll come back to see if there are any questions in the slides. So let me just take a look. All right, I don't see any questions in the slide right now, but if there are any questions, I do see a question in the chat, a few comments in the chat. Thanks Lily for responding to that. Yes, this research was funded by SHARC, so the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Where can we find out more? The last slide has a bit information on the team, on some of the tools that we have been using through this journey, and we are in the process of writing and sharing out what we are finding so far. So stay tuned, and if you'd like, I think we've got Lily and my information at the last slide, and you can reach out to us. In the meantime, are there any other questions that we can help to answer? All right, Lily, I see a question that says, can you share some of the learnings or expectations expressed by the cohort members? So can you share some of the learnings or expectations? Yes, so maybe just one example that I think about, some of the complex challenges that they brought forward. One of them was to think about protocols for monuments, for putting up monuments at cities. We know that 2020, 2021, we saw the controversy around monuments and the conversations that were happening around decolonization, equity, and some of the figures that we uphold as cities. And so one city was working on, what are the protocols for putting up monuments, for taking them down. Others were looking for different ways of engaging with the most marginalized communities or equity deserving communities. And so we saw the shift in how they were reframing their questions, and who they were seeing was left out in their usual engagement processes. So some were redesigning their engagement completely. And some were actually realizing that they did not have relationships with equity denied communities. So they had to talk to some of their colleagues who might have had that, to start to develop those relationships so they can hear different insights from their users, right? So those are just a few of the examples. And Lily, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
I don't think so. I think what you said is really great. I guess, yeah, I think there were definitely groups that ended up reframing their questions, or came in thinking that they might work on one particular challenge, and then as they went through the process realized that they needed to focus more deeply on, say, a particular kind of question that might be needed in order to further their thinking. So becoming more deeply connected to, yeah, like who is impacted by the challenges or the decisions that they're making. So how can we create like I think one group ended up creating these like drop-in sessions where people from marginalized groups would come in to share their experiences of what it is that they're experiencing related to that challenge. Yeah. So
Thanks, Vivi, for that. I think we've touched a little bit on the other question that's been put in the chat there about what are some of the experiences of any participants, what were their issues. So, and I know we can talk about those more, but I think I remember there's a team in, that was working on trying to create the same, what we were doing, sort of like a community of practice in their city. And they wanted to bring staff together working on across climate equity and climate justice or climate change and equity, and realizing that they needed to, first of all, have a defined way of even talking to their leaders, to their managers, and on what they wanted to do, seeking sort of permission and sort of making the case. So we helped them to sort of make the case for why this work was important to bring people together instead of working in silos. And then they sort of were able to identify some of the resources that would be needed for such a process. And so this was like a this was a model for how they would then go and do that in their own city. And so we're eager to see how that will continue to evolve. Let's see. Lily, help me if you see any questions that I don't see.
Yes. Well, you have comments. Did you see the question about colonial history?
So the question is, so yes, so what features about colonial history facilitate transformative innovation, and so should not be decolonized, but rather integrated, etc.?
would you mind saying a bit more about this question?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I fully.
Yeah. Vic, would you care say more about your question?
Yep, I guess I better. Got your attention. I just think that we aren't very clear sometimes about what we mean by decolonization. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't the fact that my mom and her family emigrated from Germany to flee a war and come to this country to live in a different place. Now, they were given a patch of land north of Winnipeg without permission from the indigenous people that lived there. So that bit wasn't good. But I think a lot of aspects of who Canada is and migration and so on are very positive things. So we just need to be a little clear about the word decolonization. I think that's my point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Vic, for clarifying that. Unfortunately, there isn't a defined understanding or definition that I can provide of what decolonization is. And I think that is because decolonization means different things to different people. And even among Indigenous communities, what it means to decolonize is different based on the histories and the experiences of those peoples. And so they themselves define for themselves what that would look like. And as settlers, that also looks very different. From my own perspective, as a woman who comes from a country that was colonized by the British, decolonization means for me to foreground, I've used my first name. This is a small, minute example. First name is Naomi. And over the time I have read the value of leading with my middle name, my grandmother's name, Mombi, because it holds so much history and so much context of my identity and my people's. And so what decolonization means for me, it starts with decolonizing my mind and really understanding what are some of the things that we've been socialized to believe as the norm, as what we uphold, and how can those be harmful, and then how does that show up in my work in terms of how we expect to do work, the languages we speak, whose stories are valued and whose stories get told. We know that cities have been, for the most part, shaped by the stories of the dominant people, the people who had the power to write their narratives and their vision for these cities, whereas other people were on the margins. Those who were displaced were on the margins. So I think it starts with truth telling of the lands in which we're in, like you were saying. And I think it's good to acknowledge how land was given to your family, for example. And really, it's a complex process. So I'll leave it there. Lily, I don't know if you have anything to add, but I know we can have more conversations. And there's a resource that I found really helpful by this organization called COCO, and it talks about the white supremacy practices and ways of being and antidotes for that can help us to see and really name the processes that have brought us to where we are today. So perhaps I'll leave it there. And Lily, I don't know if you have anything to add, but yeah.
I think that's great, Mambi. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And those are not easy questions, but as you said yourself, we need to confront those questions, and it's part of the process of the transformative process. Again, I thank you. We're reaching the time, well, we're past the time we're supposed to be finished, and it's never long enough. There are other questions in the chat, but I guess because I fear people I've had only that time to stay, so they'll be moving away. So I don't want people to start leaving before thanking you again. Wishing that maybe we can invite you in a third time with Lily, of course. Or so Jenna has put in the chat a link to the Copy Canada course, and I should be putting, or Lauren, you'd probably be faster than me to put the link to the association as well in the chat. Thank you. And I don't know, Jenna, maybe you may want to have the last word. I didn't tell you in advance, but still.
No, of course, thank you. I was answering a comment. The recording on our end, on the COPE end, will probably be in our teaching resources section in the participation section. So you can look for it there, and always contact us anytime, any questions. We're a community of practice too, so one of our mandates, or one of our aspirations anyway, is to be responsive to people who are looking for more information on ecosystem approaches to health, and especially the teaching of it. So just a last word to thank Mumbi and Lily for making the time to be with us and share those really, really insightful thoughts about how to operationalize participation, which is so often talked about in the should, and it's great to see it being done. And thanks to Lauren again for all the help setting up the webinar. And thanks to everyone here who made the time to listen in. A little tiny note for our students. So as Joanne mentioned at the beginning, we've got students or webinar participants. We're going to be meeting in Canvas. So you can migrate there just after we close here. I think that's it for me.
Okay, well, thank you very much again. And I'll see, well, for the students, we see one another in a few minutes. And otherwise, thank you everybody for being there. Bye.
If I may please request Jenna, please send me. I'd like to follow up on the questions in the chat that I didn't get to, just so for my own knowledge.
Yes,
So
of
please,
course.
if you can send this to me. Yeah.
I think,
Yes.
Lauren, it'll go into on your computer. So we'll get that to you, Mumbi.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.